Hey there, welcome to another episode of the Instant Impact Podcast. Whether you are brand new and this is your first time joining, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Or if you are a returning loyal listener, thank you so much. I think you're going to get a lot of value out of today's episode. And I'll tell you why. A lot of the conversations I've been having with my clients on the personal branding side recently have been about how do they get booked on more podcasts as a guest. And a lot of my clients are looking for different ways to grow their brand, grow their influence. For some of them, they were maybe doing in-person, like speaking and networking events, and that's not happening for them right now. So they're looking for different ways to grow their brand and their audience. And I also have a lot of clients who have always been interested in this. And now they're saying, this seems like a really good time to be focusing on my podcast strategy. But there's a lot of almost mystery or confusion that can surround getting booked as a guest on a podcast. Who do you reach out to? How do you do the pitch? How do you get selected to come on the show? How do you stand out from the crowd in your pitch, right? There's all these different questions that we need to get answered in order to be successful here. And so there's so many, like I said, there's so many questions that I wanted to bring on a real expert today to help demystify this whole process and help you be super successful in your efforts to get booked on more quality shows. And so my guest today is just the most amazing human named Kelly Glover. First of all, you're going to love her accent. She's from Australia. So I just had a lot of fun listening to her. But a little bit about Kelly. She books podcast tours for entrepreneurs, and she has a 19-year track record working in media, and actually started working in podcasting in 2007, which I had to ask her. I was like, this has to have been at the very beginning of when podcasts started coming out. And I don't know if it was at the very beginning, but it was towards the beginning. She's got a radio background as well. So she's just a true expert in positioning, pitching for audio related media. And so I brought her on the show to really teach us and help us learn, how do we book more podcasts? What are the ins and outs? She gives some incredible tactics. This is super strategic, some hacks that you can use to stand out from the crowd, to have a much higher success rate with booking podcasts. And what can you expect from it in terms of business growth, in terms of ROI? How do you maximize the experience? One of the other things that I love that she teaches is really just how to hone your communication skills. And this is going to apply whether you are going on a podcast or whether you are, trying to up your live video game or even just speaking with customers. There's so many tips and hacks that Kelly teaches in this interview that you're going to be able to use in your business to up your communication skills and to develop deeper relationships with people. And of course, to get booked on a lot more podcasts. So I think you are going to love this conversation. You're going to love learning from our guest today. And so with that, let's welcome Kelly Glover to the podcast. Kelly, I am so excited to have you on the podcast today. I think that the whole conversation about how do we get booked on more podcasts and grow our brand and our business that way, it's always relevant, but it's so relevant right now. I can't tell you how many customers right now are coming to me saying, I need to find a different way to market my business. I need to find a better way to connect with new customers. And they're trying to figure out, how do I get booked on more shows? But it can feel so overwhelming. So I know you are going to shed a ton of light on that for us today. And I'm so grateful for that. So welcome, my friend.
Thank you. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Elyse.
Yes. Well, I'm kind of curious, before we get into that, I noticed on your website that you got started in podcasting, I think in 2007. If I read that correctly, which I was thinking back and wondering, were there even podcasts then? I feel like that was that must have been at the very cusp of when podcasting was starting. How in the world did you get involved in this whole world in the first place?
Yeah, so I've got a 20-year background in media and entertainment. And in 2007, I was in radio, and a podcast back then was when you had the radio show after it had gone live. You edited out the songs, edited out the commercials, and that was a podcast. So really, it was an edited up radio show that was a podcast, and it took hours. It was pages of printouts and following instructions and all this really difficult stuff. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But again, yeah, that was in 2007. So we're recording this in 2020, so 13 years ago. And now that was in a studio, right? On a radio show. And now you can just open up your laptop, record something, upload it, and you've got a podcast in minutes. So it's changed hugely, absolutely hugely.
And am I right that must have been at the very beginning? I'm trying to think of when the first podcasts were launched, but that must have been at the very beginning of it.
No, it wasn't the first. They'd been around for a while. Like, I'm not the first person to ever do a podcast by any means, but it was an early wave. Mm-hmm. But I think sometimes in radio as well, it's a bit like music where you hear a song and the radio announcer is sick of it by the time everyone's just getting used to it. So that's a bit like podcasts. People are cottoning onto podcasts, but I'm like, well, I did that 13 years ago. You know what I mean? So it's just the cycle of how it goes on early adopters and all those things. So yeah, I must find out the date of the first podcast and who did it and what it was and all that for historical purposes, Elyse.
Right. They were probably writing on a tablet. They were taking their notes on a tablet, right?
2 cups and a piece of string.
Yeah. I started my first podcast in, when was it? It must have been 2015. And it felt still somewhat early wave, which it's certainly, not necessarily, but I think you make a good point of today. I feel like everyone is doing this. So it's just interesting to see how much it's grown and exploded.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love it. I couldn't be happier. I could not be happier. And it's great having seen the evolution. That's amazing.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and I know a lot of what we're going to talk about today is what you teach your clients about podcast guest strategy and booking more podcasts. I'm just curious though for myself, how did you transition from hosting a podcast to helping people with getting booked and their strategy on that?
Yeah, so I was a radio announcer. I hosted a syndicated radio show in Australia called a love song dedication show. So much like Delilah in regional Australia, which I know one of your former clients did for the Spanish speaking market. So that's a little bit funny. And I moved back to Los Angeles and then couldn't get a job in radio with this accent. So I started writing podcast show notes, moved into podcast guest booking, and then started my own agency. So podcasting really, even though I had been podcasting since 2007, moving into it as a professional industry, doing the booking element was something that happened due to something else, and how amazing did it turn out. So sometimes you just follow the golden thread and it works out and it's amazing. And that's what's happened in this case.
Yeah. Well, so the first thing is I'm shocked that they wouldn't give you a job on the radio with that accent. Like, if I could borrow your accent and use it for all of my work, I feel like it would automatically, it's like people would just love it. Right? It's crazy to me that happened. But like you said, sometimes it is the happy accident where one thing doesn't work out and it leads to another door that opens. And so sometimes that's how
I think I sound like Crocodile Dundee, so your ears are much nicer than mine.
I love it. I think it's funny. Like, Americans, we love accents. We absolutely love accents. And I've ended up doing a lot of work in Australia with Australian clients, and I love my Australian people as well. So anyway, with that being said, I want to hear from you, because I think there's so much confusion about how do I get booked on a podcast? How do I stand out from the crowd? Especially, I don't know if you've noticed this, but I feel like right now more than ever, my inbox is being flooded with guest pitches, which makes sense because it is one of the best ways you can be growing your business right now. But I really want to get into some of the details of somebody's looking to book more podcasts. How can they stand out from the crowd? What's the strategy that they can use? And I know one of the things that you talk about is, for a podcast guest strategy, expectations versus reality, which it makes me think of like a Pinterest fail, which I've baked a lot of cakes that are Pinterest fails. So I'm curious to hear from you. What does that mean, right? Do people have the wrong expectations about what will happen for them when they go on a podcast?
Yeah, I think so. And the first thing is people come to me and say, hey, I want to get booked on podcasts, but that's about step 6. Step 1 is getting your personal brand in order. And I know that's what you do a lot of work with. So people are already ahead of the curve by having that in order, because a lot of people actually don't. So that's amazing. The other thing is with expectations, people say, hey, I want to be on Joe Rogan. Tim Ferriss, Oprah, who, by the way, doesn't really even have a podcast. It's a repackaging of the TV show. So they just want to be on the top level podcast, whether or not they've been on one, whether or not they have established audience and the numbers behind it. So to me, that's the equivalent of saying, I want to date Brad Pitt or nobody. So
Yeah.
you know what I mean? So, and also you need to be a little bit self-aware of the level that you are at. Maybe with Tim Ferriss, you may be the best guest ever, but if the last people were Gary Vaynerchuk and Richard Branson, you may not be in that league yet. Doesn't mean you won't be. Doesn't mean you won't bump into him at the supermarket one day and he says, yes, come on my show. That would be amazing. But if you're sending a cold pitch and don't have the track record and or status at this point, the likelihood of you getting on that show is slim at this point. So it's setting the expectation of the level of show, having self-awareness of where you are, but also having that stretch goal in place. Like, it is important. If that's your goal and you absolutely should go to it, but just don't expect that you may be on that show tomorrow. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, and I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on this too, because one of the things that we talk with our clients about is what's the best show going to be for you from a lead conversion standpoint? Because a show like that can be phenomenal for credibility, for building your brand. But there's also a lot of smaller shows with, let's say, 2,000 downloads a month where they have really loyal audiences. And one of the conversations I have a lot with my clients is, look, if you were asked to go speak to an audience of 2,000 people in an auditorium tomorrow, would that be a good opportunity for you? And they're like, yes. And so to me, getting on a podcast, even if it doesn't have the highest downloads, but if they've got a really specific loyal listener base, 2,000 people is 2,000 people. 500 people is 500 people. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes.
Okay.
It's all about niche curated audiences. And what you're doing is leveraging the influence of the host. So they're already established, they're already niche, they're curated, they're engaged audiences. And you're also having a relationship with the host as well. So you're not only accessing the audience that's listening to the podcast, you're also accessing their network and clients outside of the podcast. So don't overlook the relationship with the host. And a lot of podcasts, they're 500 to 2,000 downloads. And would you travel to Columbus, Ohio to get in a room with 500 people that are your exact audience in your niche? Yes, you would. And you'd pay for the hotel, you'd pay for the ticket, you'd pay for all that. So can you walk into your office and or living room and put on a set of headphones and sit in front of a mic for 30 minutes to get in front of that audience, knowing that 2 years from now, another 500 people will listen to it? I think the answer should be yes.
Yeah.
So podcasting is beneficial in that way. And unlike doing a live speech or, TV blog, whatever it is, podcasts are on demand that you can get later. And it's 30 minutes in someone's ear, 30 minutes to 60 minutes, as opposed to a headline, a quote, and a scan. And with podcasts, people are looking for podcasts and it's a warm lead from the host, as opposed to happening to stumble across something like scrolling through, accidentally seeing something. If someone's listening to a show, they're either in someone's audiences and you're the referral as the guest from the host, or they're looking for a solution to a problem and a topic. So they're going out searching for you. It's not accidental. And that's the difference between a niche, smaller audience as opposed to big and broad. Yeah. So and those are often accidental. You're listening, like if you're watching Jimmy Fallon on The Tonight Show, you're going to watch Jimmy Fallon to see who happens to be on that night, not for the actual person. So you're going for that person rather than the actual audience. And it's just stumbling across it.
Yeah. Well, and I think it speaks to there's a lot of people I think who focus on getting mainstream media, either TV, radio, which is super valuable again from a credibility standpoint, but you have to think about the user behavior and what's happening when someone has that on. A lot of think about getting even a segment on the news, right? If somebody's watching the news, it's very likely also maybe a meal time. They're getting dinner ready for the family. They're getting breakfast ready. They're kind of just hearing it in one ear. They're not necessarily there for that specific purpose of learning more about your niche, your industry. And so from a credibility standpoint, it's great, go for it. However, from a lead conversion standpoint, it's probably not going to be your best lead generator for your business.
Well, Yeah, podcasts are a positioning play. They're not infomercials. And I think that's another mistake people make is I'm going to go on this and then people are going to buy my stuff. They're not there for a commercial. That's not what it's about. It's actually edutainment. And I know that's a hugely dorky word. And I actually dislike the word edutainment, but it is accurate. It's true. It is 100% true. So people go on there because they want to be entertained, but they want to learn something. And at the end of the podcast, they want to be able to go and take action on something that they've learned that you've taught them. So it's about you being the expert in your field, which you are, and then relaying that information. And that is positioning you, as you said, the authority, the credibility, the reputation, the influence, amplifying your message, strengthening your personal brand. It's doing all those things, but I don't think you can expect someone's listening to you on a podcast and they're going to go and buy your thing immediately. It's just getting them into your ecosystem so it expedites the know, like, and trust factor.
Brilliant. Brilliant. So let's talk a little bit about that, because I'm imagining one of the questions you get a lot is about the ROI of podcasting. Is that something that you can track? Is it not? Like, what do you say to somebody who's curious about the ROI of going on a podcast?
Yeah, it's not an advertisement. It's not a Facebook ad. If you want to be able to track complete analytics on that, then you need to say, I want a 32-year-old woman in Los Angeles, California with 2 kids who earns $30,000 a year and has a Toyota Corolla. Then you can track it. You can track how many clicks. You can track all the things. With podcasting, you don't have access to any analytics because that's the responsibility, or not responsibility, but that is what the host has. And the host can choose to share that with you or not. Most of the time they don't, because that's what they own. So you will not know the downloads. You will not know the TSL, which is time spent listening. As a guest on a podcast, you don't have the right and or access to any of that data. You can do a call to action and you can have a coupon code and all those different things if you want direct response in that way. However, I don't know about you, but I might hear someone on a podcast, then I might go and check out their Instagram, then I might go so the way that I might hear you, and then I might hear you on another show, and I might see you on all these different ways. So even though I've come into your ecosystem, you might not be tracking the way that I've actually initially heard you. So I realize that that's not a satisfactory response and what people want to hear, but it is how it works. So there's not, can you track someone listening to your show and they click something? No, not really. You can't.
Well, and I appreciate
it's not advertising.
I appreciate your honesty about that too, because I think that's when I think about, people I've bought stuff from. I mean, I even think about, oh gosh, this was a while back, but I think I was listening to Brennan Burchard on Lewis House's podcast. I was very familiar with Brennan. I'd followed him for a while, but it was something about, but I'd kind of stopped thinking about him, stopped following him as actively. And then just seeing him back on the show, it reignited my interest in what he was doing and in his message. And I think I got back on the email list. And then just through his nurturing and the great job he does with his marketing, I ended up buying several of his programs. And I know that's how he generates a lot of leads and other people generate leads, but it sounds like it's about the introduction to the relationship or the reintroduction to the relationship. And just getting people back. I like how you said in your ecos.
Yeah, it's getting people in your ecosystem. It's awareness. It's, there's Elyse. Oh yeah, I saw her on this podcast. I saw her on that podcast. And also they've listened to you for 30 minutes. And when you consume a podcast, we consume it like a book. We say we're in the middle of a podcast. Oh, I'm listening to that podcast. You might go to the store. Well, if you stop, when you walk into the store, you're going to press play when you get back in. So that 30 minutes with someone is hugely, you remember the words. Right now, you can hear our excitement. You can hear how I'm articulating. You're getting a better idea of me and working with me. You'll remember this. You'll remember my stories. You're going to remember this more than you'll get from another form of media. And then you might see me again and you'll have this memory as well. So I think if you're thinking of podcasts as I want to go on it and I need to sell the thing and it needs to be in a 24-hour period and X amount of sales from X appearances, I think that's you're probably going to be disappointed with the results that you get from that. So think about it as a positioning play and getting people into your ecosystem, knowing who you are, getting them on the list. But the SEO is also from the relationship with the host, so not SEO, sorry, the ROI and SEO, because if you are going as a guest on a podcast, don't forget there's going to be show notes attached to that. And if you use your keywords in the show notes and they get transcribed, they go into the transcription, you're also going to get link backs in the show notes, and then the host and yourself are going to promote that show so that content gets repurposed into multiple forms. So the ROI is not just from a X sale, X click on X day. That gets turned into a LinkedIn post. It gets turned into a Instagram post. Maybe it's an audiogram. Maybe it's in the newsletter. You then use it in a speech. You can pull a quote from that. You can repurpose that content in so many different ways. And the equity in your personal brand, like, put a value on that. You can't.
Right. Exactly.
Or the ROI is getting your message right. It's practicing being, doing media. It is, okay, I was in this podcast, talking about wanting to be on Tim Ferriss one day. Well, maybe you've now done 50 podcasts and you've leveled up every single time in the different audience access. That's an ROI. So I think there's a lot more than in the way that people think. And it's, if you overlook it, you're missing out, because it's amazing, Elyse.
Yes. Well, I'm personally a huge fan, obviously. And a lot of what you're saying is it's about putting in the reps and the skills you learn, the communication skills. I remember with my first podcast, I got the nickname Giggles because I had this like nervous laugh where I wanted to make the guest feel welcomed. And that was just my way of doing it. And I didn't even realize it until my co-host pointed out after a show. And I thought, oh my gosh, how often am I doing that just in general communication? And so even if I had gotten nothing else out of hosting the show and being a part of it, just learning how to communicate more clearly and learning how to create space for other people to talk, because I had this thing where I didn't like the space and the silence. It made me uncomfortable. I learned so much from that. So for someone who's listening, who is saying, okay, I get this, I see the value, I want to go on more shows, what are some of the things they should be thinking about in terms of prepping for their pitch, in terms of standing out from the crowd when they're pitching podcasts? I know there's a lot, but share with us maybe your top couple of tips for someone to have success in this area.
Okay, the first thing you need is a media one sheet, and that is a PDF document that is a one pager and summarizes you for a producer or booker to have a look at. So that would have your headshot, your name, your bio, your talking points, sample questions, and way for them to contact you. And that needs to be completely on brand. Mm-hmm. So that is a shorthand. Now, make no mistake, that's not going to get you booked. That doesn't get the yes, but it's one of those credibility markers, and it opens a key to another door. So the first thing you need, even before that, is you need an excellent email subject line, assuming you're pitching that way, because if you don't have that nailed, the email won't even get opened. So it's having the subject line, then it's having the credibility markers attached, and the pitch needs to be on point, because if you go in saying, hey, loved recent episode 47 of your show, by the way, I'm awesome, I've got a book and I'd like to be a guest, it's a bit, so what, who cares? Mm-hmm. So you need to go in knowing who the audience is, having listened to episodes of the show, knowing the back catalogue of who's been on the show, so you can pitch in addition or counterpoint to that content that's been on there and offer something to the audience. Because the clue is, it's not actually about you, it's the expertise you bring to the audience and what you can teach them. So it's not even about the host. The host is the gatekeeper to the audience. They're protecting the audience of what they're offering them in the way of content. So it's knowing all those things and crafting the pitch, and then making sure you have good talking points, because a topic and then talking points are not the same thing. I think people get that mistaken quite frequently. They'll say, I want to talk about entrepreneurship. That's awesome, but that's an overarching topic, and that actually doesn't really tell me much. Yes. What am I going to learn from that? It's just an overarching topic. Like, that's a no to me. That shows me you haven't taken time to listen to the show, to cater to my audience, and it's very general.
Yes. Oh my, okay. So you said a couple of key things there that I want to hone in on. One is just having that prepared media one sheet, even prepping for our interview today, where you've got on your website, you've got a list of, these are the talking points. This is how to introduce me. All of it is there. It makes the host job so much easier. And out of everyone I've interviewed on my show, it's maybe 2% of people put in the effort to do that. So it's not that you can't get an interview with that, but I think one thing that people forget is the easier you can make the job of the host to interview you, the more likely you are to get referred. Like I'm thinking right now, as we talk about these other hosts who I know, who I think would love to have you on the show, because it's so easy to interview you. You make it so easy for the host. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that comes from so I was a radio announcer and I was also a podcast producer. So I produced branded podcasts for mid six-figure shows, like 12 episodes, millions of downloads. Mm-hmm. And as a producer, when I'm booking guests, so I created something that I wish existed and people would send me to make my job easier. So I just reverse engineered that. So there's the one sheet, and the other element of that is an online press kit. And that's where you have the bio, because you can't assume that the host does all the work. Like if you've written a book, the host may not even read the book. So you need to go in there prepared that they haven't read the book, and then make it easy for them, because you don't want them to make them look silly. Yeah. And you want to help them along because they're trying to help you as well. Like no one's trying to, this is not hard hitting investigative journalism where anyone's trying to trick anyone. We all want to have a really great time, right? So if I can hand you multiple options in my online press kit where I've approved the photos, that's a win-win, because they're good photos, they're quality photos, they're high resolution. You've got multiple to pick from, so that helps with your branding, and you can download them and you just have to go to one spot. Also, with we've all got so many social media these days. LinkedIn, Facebook, you might have two Facebook, you might have a group, you might have your business and your personal for all these different things. So if I can put those links in one spot where all you need to do as the host, Elyse, is go click, 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 that's maybe saved you 20 minutes.
Yes.
Same with finding the bio. And instead of, oh, that's an update, that's out of date. Well, guess what? If it's on your online press kit, it's always in date, because I can just go in there and quickly change it at any second to make sure it's the most recent. And also interviews. If I get an awesome interview, and you need to listen to me to make sure I know what I'm talking about as the host. That's one of the cross-check and verifies I know that you'll do. Mm-hmm. So if I can line up a place where there's 4 different interviews and or TV or whatever, and you click, you can quickly go through those, and that helps. It helps you get to a yes, and it also helps your research.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Amen to all of that. One other thing, you piqued my curiosity when you were talking about having an excellent subject line. So you don't have to give away all of your secrets, but any best practices for subject lines, or any examples of subject lines that you've seen success with for getting booked?
Yeah, so it needs to be, at the Talent Squad, we say clickbait that actually delivers. Okay, and the key is actually delivers. If I send you an email subject line that says Kelly Glover podcast guest, so what, who cares, right? Yeah. Who's Kelly Glover? Don't know. Podcast guest, big deal. Boring. So it needs to be, when you're thinking of clickbait that actually delivers, think about a blog post headline, a book title, or the cover of a newspaper. What is going to get me to open that is giving you content that you absolutely, like, you need to scroll through and then be like, oh, I've got to scroll back up because I just have to click on that and find out what it is. So it needs to be something like that. That's the best way I can describe it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it makes a lot of sense. And a lot of what I'm hearing you say is just putting in the time and the effort to stand out from the crowd. And I would imagine there's different approaches to this, where some people may just do kind of the spray and pray approach, where you send out, it's a volume game, but you're going to get, X percentage, a little tiny bit. Or from what I'm hearing from you, it sounds like you're way more strategic with who you're going after, and you're more focused, but you put in the time and the effort to do the research so that you do stand out. I mean, even thinking back to your pitch for our show, it was like, it was such I can't even remember what you said, but I remember it was such quick, easy yes for me, and it usually isn't. So clearly you're doing something right.
So what are you seeing, Elyse? Because I'm sure you get pitched a lot. So what's coming through your inbox, and what's the frequency, and what makes you say yes and what makes you say no?
It's a great question. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a lot of the mistakes that you've already spoken to, that I'm seeing, where I'm just kind of like delete, where it's super generic, or it's actually not on brand at all for me. And it shows they haven't taken the time at all to get to know me. Like somebody approached me recently with a story about how they've grown a sports team. And it was like, if you know me at all, if you know my podcast, I know nothing about sports. Sorry, but I'm not even that interested in sports. And they're like, it'll be a really inspirational story for your audience. And it just tells me that they haven't taken the time. And then occasionally there's somebody like you, or there's somebody like some of my other guests who say, hey, I've taken a listen to your podcast. I really like this particular episode, or I like your focus on this. Here's something that I think I could bring to your audience that would be of value. If you think so too, let's connect and schedule a time to do this. And so it's really it is the personalization and customization as I think about it, which again, it takes some time, but you're going to probably have a much higher success rate.
And a little trick is email yourself. And see how it shows up in your inbox, because that way you can test the headline and see how much shows up. I know in my email, I usually get the subject line in the first couple of lines. And if you're wasting that couple of lines on, hi, I love the last episode of blah, 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 well, that's not actually giving you any information if you're just scrolling through your email. So you need to put the really good stuff up front in the first couple of lines, because that is also what you're getting in the email. Not with everybody's email. It depends how individuals have them set up, but that can be your pitch. So you can squeeze, you've got a limited amount of words, and it's very valuable real estate. So my advice is use that real estate. And the more you do, the quicker you get, the better you get, the more creative you get. It really is wordsmithing. It's wordsmithing and also sales, but headlines. It's not really copywriting, headlines copywriting.
Yeah. Interesting. Now you've got me thinking
about. You can't clickbait yourself. You can't clickbait someone else. If I don't want to open my own headline, then I can't expect somebody else will.
Yeah. Gosh, you've got me thinking about what we put in my emails. And I think we probably would start off with something like hey, loved your episode on blah, blah, blah. So that's, from what I'm hearing from you, is that's not actually the best thing to put at the opener of an email.
I don't think so. Because test it on yourself when you email it to yourself, and what shows up in those first couple of lines, that's wasted real estate, because it's not telling me anything new as the recipient. Because you're like, yeah, blah, 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 blah. Like, it sounds mean the way that I'm saying it, but so what, who cares? But that's how we think about in our mind. We're just articulating what we think that we may not know. Yeah. Just think about, you'd really get to the good stuff, get to the point, get to the point. So flip it and get to the point, and then put that underneath.
Interesting. Okay.
And it's only from years of doing this that you figure it out. And you're right. It is simple. And can people do it? Yes, they can. But it also took a long time to figure this stuff out. And once you figured it out, it makes it much easier.
Totally.
As with anything.
Yeah. Can you give us an example of what a good opener would be on a pitch email?
A good opener, it would depend. So I was saying that I listened to you on a recent episode. I'd probably, maybe something about, for me, if I was pitching you, now that I know about the love song dedication connection, I could put that in there, because that's a former client of yours, and it's got to do with radio and stuff. So again, you have to work for it and craft for it and make it specific to the person. So if I'm talking about your previous client, it proves that I've shown that I've listened to them. I've got a link to that. It was radio and it's podcast. Yeah. I'd have to really craft and wordsmith that into, you'd be like, oh, it needs to get that response for you to open it up, to show that I've paid attention, because you're like, I need to know what she's saying about that. Yeah. So there is work in crafting, but something like that.
Well, and that's a great hack to use for any sort of marketing too, is just to send the email to yourself, see if you would pause to open it or not. So I love that. Like, that's a great takeaway that I'm taking away from this interview, is with anything you're hoping to get open from someone, send it to yourself first and see.
And another technique, because I find that a lot of people are experts in their fields, and this is the personal branding work that we do, and I'm sure you do as well, is that people can't recognize in themselves what's the most interesting sometimes, and they can't boil it down and articulate those golden threads in the way that they could. They just take it for, oh, I just do that normally, and that's not a big thing, where that might be the biggest thing about them that's the most interesting. So an easy technique for that is to just add someone else's name to it, because we take ourselves for granted or don't think we're so great a lot of the time. So I could call myself Amanda, and I'd be like, oh, Amanda does this. She went to the National Radio School in Australia. She used to do celebrity interviews on the red carpet. She was a tour guide in Europe for a year. She lost 200 pounds. And I would think that Amanda was a pretty amazing person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's all the stuff that I've done. So someone else would
Wow.
think that I'm amazing. But as soon as you put somebody else's name on it, you can suddenly see your value because you're detaching yourself from that scenario.
Mm.
So if you were to meet yourself as somebody with, if you were to meet somebody else that had done all the things that you had with your resume, your back catalog, your skills, your story, would you find them fascinating and interesting? And that's how to extract the elements of you.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, because you're right. We're so humble. We forget what makes us amazing. We forget what makes us different. We take it for granted. And so just kind of repersonifying somebody else with that
Mm-hmm.
helps you appreciate it more. Now, one other question for you, because obviously part of the strategy I would imagine of getting booked on more shows is being a great guest when you're on the show. So let's say that we do all the work, we get on the show that we've been wanting to get on. What are some best practices that we can implement so that we don't mess it up and we make the most of the opportunity to get referred and get booked for more shows?
Okay, well, the one step before you even go on the show, and we say this to our clients at the Talent Squad all the time, is practice in private before you go public. Because
Mm.
a lot of people that are doing media will tell me, I'm an introvert, I'm scared, I'm not sure about this, I'm nervous. Fine, I totally get it. But the great thing with podcasts is they're the speaking tour you can do without leaving the house, okay? Which is fantastic, especially for introverts, because right now it's you and me. I'm in my home, in my office. You're in your home, in your office. It's 1-to-1. It's you and me. There could be one person listening. There could be 1,000. There could be 100,000. There could be 1,000,000. But right now, it's you and me. So practice in private before you go public. Get those questions down on a piece of paper. We've all got laptops these days. Go to any number of programs, open it up, record, and just practice answering those questions. So
Mm.
by the time you get to that interview, you're confident in knowing that you can do it because you've done it 1,000,000 times, even if it's just 3 minutes a day. So that will just help you be like, okay, I've got this. I've practiced to my Zoom call, and I've got the questions written down. I know what they're likely to ask me. Because again, it's not hard-hitting journalism, 60 minutes. It's not a trick. The other thing, so you can get your team, your family member, practice yourself. And because most of them are Zoom and or video online, you can have a Google Doc open. You can
Mm.
have some cheat sheets there. And I always do, just because it makes me feel comfortable. Do I use them? No, never. But if I did and I forgot what I was saying, I can just have those little points there. No one will ever know. I just have a look over. So that makes me feel safe. So I've got my practicing, I've got my points there, I've done the rehearsal, I know what's likely to be asked, I've got my talking points, and just make sure you've got the tech right. Doesn't have to be expensive. My setup, this is my traveling kit, less than $100. So
Mm.
easy.
Yes.
But you can bet your bottom dollar that I've got headphones and a microphone, because it's equivalent to showing up to a job interview. You're not going to do that in a pair of shorts, flip-flops, and a singlet top. So if all you have is your voice, you need to have a good microphone and head set up and show up professionally.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it. And it's that level of professionalism. It's the level, and one of the things that I like that you said too, is just the practice.
Yeah.
And I think it's always interesting to me when people are nervous to do a video call or a podcast instead of going and speaking on a stage. And I get it. Part of it is just how we're wired. But to me, this is so easy, like you said, because you can just do it from home. You can have your notes. And if you put in that extra effort at the beginning to put together the online press kit, like you've talked about, and you give the host the talking points, you can feel especially assured that you probably know what they're going to be asking you because you've made their life easier. And so you can feel really prepared and at ease as
And
well.
And there's always a green room conversation beforehand, which is you speaking to the host for a few minutes, because likely is that you're going to show up and have never spoken to them before. And there's that little chat before. And that's where you say, what's going to be a home run for your audience? What is your audience looking for? Is there anything specific that you'd like me? So you can ask questions to clarify beforehand so you know what's going to happen. And also you need to have listened to an episode. Because if the host is very regimented and very formal and you show up cracking jokes and swearing, that's not going to be a fit for the audience. So you need to be across the host's style, the format, the audience, and have had a whip around of all their socials and know who they are, so you can respect the format, the structure, the audience, and the tone of the show and be prepared for that.
Yeah. Well, and taking the time to listen, it puts you at ease too, as the guest, because you feel, you came on this call today and we're immediately connecting and kind of cutting up and having fun. And it felt like I'd known you for a long time. And I think part of that is just the preparation that you put into
I
it.
hopped on the call and I feel like Elyse, we've known each other for 7 years.
Yeah.
And sometimes I forget that and I think, have we met? No, I've just listened to podcasts, but that's what podcasting does. Yeah. You listen to an episode or a few episodes and you feel like you know the person. So instead of starting at, oh, hi, I'm Kelly, level 1, I'm jumping in at level 7 because I've already spent an hour or 2 hours with you and we're friends in my mind because I know you. Yes. So it might be more awkward for you than for me, but any good, because I know you, but most hosts, guess what? They've done their research on you. They've done their research. Another thing is you might need to ask and answer your own questions during the interview, because you can't expect that every host does their homework or that they've read the book or that they've looked all the things, or they may go in a different way than you want. It doesn't mean controlling the interview and moving it to talk about cats when you're in there to talk about dogs by any means, but you can ask and answer your own question, which actually helps the host with content. And if you do it in a strategic way, it's not going to interrupt the flow of the show. No one will even know, but you've just helped the show along and they'll think, wow, they're a really great guest. So that's another, here's the thing, podcasts and interviews in media, as you would know, Elyse, seem like, oh, I can talk and I know my subject matter, it's so easy, but there's a lot of technique in there that will set you apart and people won't be able to identify it, but they'll just think she's a really good guest or he's a really good guest. Yes. And that's what all these little secret squirrel elements are, but they do take practice.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's it. That's the missing link, or I would say not the missing, that's really the secret ingredient. Somebody who you hear go on a show and they can speak in these incredible sound bites and they sound incredibly off the cuff with things. And they have these ideas that seem to just come to them in the moment that are so brilliant. They've practiced that over and over and over again. It's kind of like a comedian who gets on a stage and it seems like it's improv. It seems like they're just making it up as they go. But in reality, they've practiced that joke so many times, they know they can't get it wrong. And so I love your idea of like the 3 minutes a day, just practicing to where you can speak succinctly and speak in sound bites and steer the conversation to where it's going to best serve the audience. All of these things are pro level tips, but they're things that just come with time.
Yeah, and it's observations. You know what it is? It's like when you see a yellow car, when you buy a yellow car and then you see them everywhere. You've never seen a yellow car before in your life until you buy one, then they're everywhere. It's a bit like that with interviews. Suddenly now we're speaking about this, you're going to notice when you tell stories, case studies, speak about all these different things, what hits and what doesn't. Are people looking away? Are they interested? Are they asking more questions? What are the frequently asked questions? Because those are going to be your talking topics. Maybe you're pitching stuff out and no one's picking it up, but they're picking up this one thing. That's what they want to know more about. When people are asking you the same question and come to you advice, that's what they want to know and that's what they need help with. So it's paying attention to all of that. And then if you're telling a story and people are like bored and don't care, cut that out. But if they're laughing and cracking up and asking you to tell it again, that's the one that you should incorporate into your interviews. So interviews are not only about topics and teaching and talking points and all that. It's about case studies. It's about metaphors. It's about stories. It's about the FAQs. It's about asking and answering your own questions. So it's all these things bundling up in what is seemingly, oh, I can talk, I can do an interview, I know my expertise. It's not.
Yes. Oh my goodness. Yes. And so what I'm hearing is drop the ego. Don't be so committed to what you put out there. Has to be a perfect home run every single time, but drop the ego and get curious about what's actually resonating, what's working, what's not, because then you can take that information and you can translate that into when you go on a stage and speak or in your social media, what should you be talking about? So really just having kind of like a light attitude of curiosity about it to help you continue to improve. So,
And give. It's about giving, Elyse.
yeah,
Because so many people, oh, it's on page 62 of my book. If you sign up for my course, no, you need to go in. Excuse me, my voice is gone. You need to go in with a giving attitude and leave it all on the table and
yeah,
trust that if someone listening to this interview, they're either going to like me or dislike me. They think I'm too pushy, too whatever at the moment. And that's great because I'm not for you. But
yeah,
if you like it, you're really going to like it. And you're my person and I'm your person.
yeah,
And either way, you've gotten value out of this conversation, and that's great. Because in podcasting, someone's life is going to change as a result of listening to this, and they're going to take action. And you and I may never meet them, and that's amazing. And I am confident that that will happen.
yeah.
So everyone has their own expertise, and that will happen in each podcast and other iterations of media as well.
Yeah, gosh. And at the end of the day, I think that's what it's about. And that's a lot of what this show is about too. It's just generosity and really leading with the mindset that the more we give, the more generous we are. That bends time. In my opinion, it bends time and space. It makes things happen faster. And like you said, you don't see the impact you have on people's lives necessarily. But going back to Brendan Burchard, he has this great quote. He says, never underestimate the value of one. And so I think and I find myself falling in this trap too. It's so easy to get caught up in the numbers and how many people listened. And you almost you take the humanity out of it. But when you can remember, if one person takes action on this and it changes their life, it grows their business, it helps them fulfill their purpose, it was worth it. It was so worth it.
And the other thing is, when you're thinking about the amount of people, that really only counts to if you're talking about CPM and advertising and you're getting paid by the listener or listen. Because if someone listens to this and they become a client, your product might be $1,000.
Yeah.
And well, if someone, that's a lot of money. That's a lot more listeners. You can have a small amount of listeners and get that $1,000, or you can have thousands and thousands and thousands of listeners to get that $1,000. So I think that if you think about it that way, it changes everything.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And that could probably be a whole nother conversation, because a lot of times the question we get is, well, how do I monetize a podcast if I host it? And usually what I tell people is it's whatever you already sell, whatever your service or product already is, just more people are going to know about it. Be your own sponsor.
If you're looking at $25 CPM, which is $25 for 1,000 listeners, that you're making $100 for 4,000 people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or you can have one person buy $1,000 product and have 200 people listen, because guess what? They're exactly in your niche. I know which I'd prefer.
That's it. It's that simple. It's that simple. This is Kelly. I feel like there's so many more questions that I'd love to ask you. And I also know that we're at time for today, but this has been so helpful and so informative. And I just appreciate the way not only you shared with us, but you also modeled it is kind of like a meta conversation, right? A podcast about podcasting, but you modeled, how do you pitch? How do you be a great guest? It's been fun. It's just been fun for me to have you on, because again, you made my life easy. So I appreciate that you took the time to do that. Tell everybody where they can connect with you if they want to learn more about your podcast agency and what you do and how you help people. What's the best way for them to connect with you?
KellyGlover.com. That's KellyGlover.com. I would love for you to visit me.
Fabulous. Guys, go check her out. Go see work she's doing. I think this is it's such a critical piece of building your brand and building your influence and your reputation. And I can't speak enough about what both hosting a podcast and then going on podcasts has done for me from my own personal brand perspective. And I think it's fun. At the end of the day, if nothing happened with it other than you get to meet really cool people who you go on their show or they come on your show, that's a benefit too. So Kelly, thank you so much for your generosity today and for your wisdom that you shared. And I know people are going to want to connect with you and get to know more about what you do. So genuinely, thank you for your time and your efforts here.
Thank you. Thank you for being such a fun and great host. Thank you, Elyse. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Instant Impact Podcast. Go connect with Kelly. Check out her website, follow her on social, and really start thinking about, if you haven't had a podcast strategy for your brand yet, what would it look like for you to add that in? It's only going to elevate it. It's only going to help you polish your communication skills, get in front of a bigger audience, and you will be amazed at the great opportunities that come from it. So thank you so much for listening today and for joining Kelly and me and being here on the show. And I will look forward to connecting with you next week for our next episode. Bye for now.